Thank you all for coming to our second webinar for the Wildlife Observatory of Australia. Today, we're going to be talking about our database and the products and services that are associated with that. And our main speaker is going to be Dr. Zachary Amir. And I'm going to do a short introduction first. My name is Matthew. So, hopping in, first, like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands in which we meet and do our research. Waiting for our next slide. There we go. We acknowledge their continuing connection to culture and pay our respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Also like to recognize that we have a great team here at WildObs across a variety of different institutions, all working together and to make the dream come true. And so big thanks to a few people today, Claire for organizing the webinar, Renuka for a lot of work behind the scenes, Jenna as well, and then also Renee for helping with a lot of the tools that Zach will present. Some quick housekeeping. We are asking people to stay muted during the talk and to put your Q&A, your questions in our Q&A section, which will be moderated and we'll answer the questions at the end. So your moment of Zen, an echidna mating ritual. Why do we need a mammal database? So this is well known that Australia is very interested in our biodiversity, and we do a great job sampling, including using emerging technologies like cameras. So we have a ton of deployments, but storing the data, managing the images, sharing everything, and doing analyses is a difficult process. And that's where WildObs wants to come in and help. Just having some slide issues. Exactly. Oh, there we go. Oh, shit. There we go. So there's a lack of resources to manage, analyze, and share data. And what that means is a lot of people have had a really difficult time managing their biodiversity data. And that's a problem because we need timely data, so data that's being converted into something we can analyze quickly for monitoring, for conservation, for management, and for research. And we really, for research, want to do richer analyses. That means moving from species distribution models to trends like occupancy and abundance. So Australia is a leader in biodiversity platforms. The ALA, which is also part of the GBIF International Biodiversity Aggregator, is very well appreciated, used, and citizen scientists use it. And it's a really powerful, excellent platform. And Australia actually has two more specific platforms just for birds. There's eBird and BirdLife Australia. These go one step beyond ALA, which is occurrence only, presence only, so they don't have information about when a species was not detected. And eBird and BirdLife do have information about what species were not detected. And that allows for you to do analyses about species trends, like with occupancy and abundance. So this is very powerful data that we think and Australia thinks is useful, and there's been a huge investment in these platforms. What you'll notice is we don't have one for mammals, even though our mammals are the most threatened group. And so that's where we hope the WildObs database can come in and serve as a predominantly a mammal database that fits into this ecosystem of other biodiversity aggregators. So WildObs provides a systematic way for sampling mammals, like with cameras. So we do cameras and a variety of services and products to help people to monitor and convert the monitoring into data streams that can be analyzed, used for a variety of purposes that I was describing earlier. And so to do that, we have a few different things. One is our image management platform. We talked about that during our first webinar. which I'll share a QR code if you want to check that out. And this is really similar to Wildlife Insights, Time-lapse, ADX AI, or Evorta, but it's got a variety of different computer vision models that are all trained specifically for Australian species. We also have a database, which we're going to be talking about today, where people can share data. And if you use this database, you can also have tools to analyze your data. And then we have a WildObs R package where you can access this database through your local computer and do your own research. And this is all available to explore online on our website. And this is a screenshot showing how these different products are available. So we really are trying to build an ecosystem to take people through the life cycle of camera trapping. So as we move into learning about what these products are, I just want to stop and really focus on why they're important for you and why you might want to use them. So for everyone, and especially the government, WildObs is going to store your data in a really secure way with backups on our national infrastructure, which means it's going to meet all the government requirements for data sovereignty. And what this means is if you have personnel turning over, maybe at your government office or in your lab at a university or at an NGO even, a lot of time when people move, you lose access to the data or the expertise about how that data was curated or where it was stored. So this protects against that. We also have standardized reporting, so we can do reporting to ALA to meet your grant requirements or your federal obligations or even your state obligations. And we have tools that if you are going to use our data standards and share data, we can allow you to view and analyze your data really easily, including custom project and analysis dashboards. Um, so for researchers, a benefit to sharing data is that you can become co-author on many papers. So people can request your full access to your data and you can join them to do their research. And for researchers, this also means you can do your own national scale inquiries. And using this data set, it all comes in really clean, standardized formats that are ready to run in a variety of different R packages. And for land managers who might be really hesitant to use some platforms, we allow a lot more sensitive data control. So you can specify how your data will be used and which species. So it's really being built for purpose for our users in Australia. If you want to learn more about the variety of products we have, there's a QR code that you can do so. So with that, I want to introduce Zachary Amir. So Zach's, I would say, one of the people in Australia who has managed and analyzed more camera trap data than probably anyone. His PhD included over 200 camera trapping surveys from Asia, and he's done a lot of camera trapping in Australia himself. And that whole process really led him to want to develop better processes for other people, and that's why he joined WildObs. And yeah, we're really happy to have him. So go ahead, take it over, Zach.
Thanks, Matthew. Yeah, I think that's actually a pretty perfect segue into a more tangible storyline that hopefully this will resonate with a few people in the crowd. So while Matthew is talking pretty big picture, I'm going to zoom in for just a moment. Our lab has been fortunate to do a lot of camera trapping across Queensland's wet tropics. It's World Heritage listed rainforest, lots of endemic biodiversity. And this all started in 2019 when Tom Bruce was conducting his PhD at James Cook University in Townsville, and he had set a number of camera surveys in the southern wet tropics. His research question was understanding if feral cats are distributed in the rainforests. Previously, before he had run these surveys, people didn't think they were very prevalent. We didn't see them during spotlighting surveys. But from the camera data, we found that they're actually way more common and widely distributed than previously known. Now, Tom joined our lab in 2022, and with that process, he shared his sampling design and his data with the lab. In 2022, the same year, I was very keen and eager to expand on some of the camera trapping that Tom had done, and I wanted to fill in some of the gaps in the northern rainforest that Tom didn't sample. And my research question here is primarily focused on studying species interactions. And I just want to highlight this series of images here that show a mom and baby patty melon. actually being chased away by a wild boar at one of my camera sites. And it's really interesting to note that I was able to quantify a statistically significant signal for this sort of interaction. But when we really carefully monitor and standardize our data, we can link our statistics to the actual images playing out. So once I found that statistical result, I was able to query the images and find this really interesting picture. So this data set's actually already been published with the Atlas of Living Australia, so the occurrence records are all there, but I'm actually still working on the paper about these species interactions. Now, fast forward to last year, I want to highlight a current PhD student in our lab, Skye Anderson. She's particularly interested in studying cassowaries, but at the beginning of her PhD, she was able to use the data collected by Tom and myself to study cassowary habitat associations. And with that, we were able to publish a research paper in Ecology and Evolution, finding that cassowaries have relationships with rainfall and forest quality across the wet tropics. But throughout this process, we actually realized we had quite a lot of gaps that were important for understanding cassowaries. So just at the end of last year, Skye had pulled in all of her cameras, primarily focusing on lowland rainforests and also resampling some important landscapes that Tom and I had sampled. So now in 2026, we end up having a compounding payoff. We have more data covering a much larger area, and that helps to give much stronger inferences. Tom, Skye, and myself are all co-authors on research projects, and the data we've published are gaining citations and more recognition. The tagged images that Tom and I painstakingly reviewed have now been used to help train and refine computer vision models that are now available on the WildObs Image Platform, and we're finding that it's incredibly faster to process Sky's new camera trapping data with this. And also, the data we collected is now being used in reporting for the State of the Environment and Threatened Species Index. So, as a result, everybody in this story is ending up with better research and better recognition due to seamless data sharing. The question I want to pose for the audience is that what if every camera trapper in Australia was in the same lab? This collection of surveys that was conducted by three people represents just a small fraction of the data that is actually housed within the WildObs database. And ultimately, the WildObs database's goal is to try to make this story that happened with three people possible for every camera trapper in Australia. This database is flexible by design, so you get to choose how you would like to engage. And I'll dig into more of these as we go on, but just as a high-level overview, if you have new projects and new images from cameras you've set in the field, we have a pathway where you can use our image platform and integrate that into our database. Say you used to be conducting camera trap surveys but are no longer, we have a legacy data pathway where you can upload your old camera trapping data, but this also works well if you don't want to use our image platform, that's totally fine. And say you're not ready to share your data, well, that's fine. You can still access all of our published data, but I'll also highlight we have embargo periods and situations that should make it encouraging to share your data. And the ultimate idea here is that we accommodate how you actually work. We're not trying to change the way you work to fit our design. So I gave you an example, a local example of a successful story, but let's zoom back out and see how this problem manifests across the entire country. How many data sets like our story exist? Well, when we published our review paper, we quantified how much data we could find in the published literature versus when we specifically asked camera trappers in Australia. We found that there's actually thousands of unpublished camera trapping surveys across the country, and oftentimes this data is completely inaccessible beyond the original team that collected it. While this may look like a big data scenario, this data can't be combined, discovered, or reused, which means ultimately it can't be analyzed. When we have this sort of scenario, each year of siloed data is a year of missed potential collaborations. Now, I want you all to imagine a scenario. Let's say there could be multiple organizations, this is NGOs, governments, academics, that are all interested in the same threatened species and monitoring a few landscapes over a decade. Let's say this is happening in WA and we have a collection of groups that are somewhat overlapping. However, these groups don't adopt a consistent data standard. They don't adopt a consistent sampling design. So the data arrives in different formats of different quality and describing the same information with different fields. Ultimately, this really rich camera data can be reduced to a simple presence dot, and that's one way you could try to combine this information, but you would lose all of that extra rich detail. So you end up having a decade of combined monitoring effort with no range-wide inferences being possible because the data can't be combined. In this sort of scenario, the data is there, the question's there, but the answer is not because the standard wasn't there. So when we think about a data standard, I want to highlight that the underlying data doesn't actually change. Instead, the data standard changes what's possible with the data. You could think of the previous examples data as a messy desk. Files are everywhere, cables are not organized even remotely, but when you apply a data standard, you are essentially putting everything in the place where it belongs. Somebody else could walk up to this desk and figure out where your files are, where your cables belong. However, we realize converting to a new data standard can be challenging, so WildObs is here to help as much as we can. So I've mentioned the data standard. What is the standard that makes this possible? We have adopted a data standard called CamTrap-DP that you'll hear me talk about throughout this presentation. This wasn't a WildObs invention, but it's the standard the global camera trapping community has converged on. I've stolen this figure from the publication describing CamTrap-DP, and I'll walk you through it so we understand exactly what it is. It's composed of four files. The first one describes the overall project, essentially who, how, and why was this project conducted. Now, for our first table, we have a table describing exactly where and how long cameras were set in the field, a table describing what the files that came out of the camera and how they matter for the observations, and then the observations tell us what was actually detected in front of that camera from that file. We wrap all of this up, and that's what we call a data package, which is the DP in CamTrap DP. So this is an international standard. It's been developed by Tedwig, who's responsible for the Darwin Core, if you're familiar with that data standard. It's been used by us. It's used across the EU. Agouti, another image platform, uses it, CamTrap R, and a growing list of researchers. So if you use camera trap data, this should be on your radar. While we're on the topic of standards, I want to highlight the differences between required and optional data. Ultimately, the more information you provide, the more everyone benefits. You can think of this like playing a game. The required fields are the minimum you have to do to just play in the game, whereas these optional fields help you play the game well. For your deployments, we really just need to know where and when they were active. But you could be including things like camera height, angles, these sorts of things that help contextualize multiple deployments together. For our observations, we really just need the timestamp of what sort of image was collected. However, we could be gathering things like the number of individuals in an image, any unique behaviors, that sort of stuff. Within our media, we really just need the file paths to source the media to those observations. However, we know for a lot of legacy data, a lot of media has been lost. We've heard examples of floods, drowning hard drives. So don't let that be a barrier for sharing data. We have workarounds for that. But you could also be flagging which media is your favorite. So as you see this presentation, you see all the camera trap media here. Think about how we chose all those media files. Ideally, if you're collecting more non-required fields, you're going to be playing the game much better. So we hope and encourage people will, you know, move beyond just the minimum requirements. I also want to take a moment to spell out fair data. This is probably a term or an acronym that you've heard before. So the F stands for findable. Data is discoverable without knowing somebody or without knowing it exists. It's accessible as well, so somebody can download data, or if it's not downloadable, they can request access to it. It's interoperable, meaning the data speaks the same language as other data sets and tools. And it's reusable, so the data arrives with enough context to be used confidently. As I just shown with Sky's research paper, fair data can directly inform new research and goes well beyond a basic compliance exercise. The point I want to highlight here is that CamTrap DP is fair data. This is because we've translated it across different data standards. So we can freely and easily share data with the Atlas of Living Australia or the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, GBIF, and we can share data with TERN and potentially the Federal Biodiversity Data Repository through our conversion to their data standard. Therefore, when you use CamTrap DP, it actually opens up your data to the global biodiversity informatics ecosystem. I also want to highlight an example of existing interoperability. There's an R package I'd mentioned earlier, CamTrap R, and they've created a function for a custom dashboard to analyze your camera trapping data. And because it already expects CamTrap DP data standard, we can get this running with just a few lines of R code. This is a screenshot from my data I collected in the wet tropics. We can see here there's a number of different analyses or visualizations we can do with the data. And as an example, I've pulled out a map of species richness detected at my cameras and also the activity pattern of a species, the musky rat kangaroo. I want to give an opportunity to highlight that CamTrap DP has traction beyond our organization. So I gathered testimonials from some colleagues. We have Guru, who's the Director of Data Services and Analytics at Turn, who highlights that the clear documentation and working examples of CamTrap DP has helped us translate it to the Turn ontology, which represents an exchange's systematic survey data. This means Turn can now ingest WildObs data into the platform EcoPlots. We're currently working on the prototype implementation, so watch this space. We also have Peggy Newman, who's the data manager of the Atlas of Living Australia. She highlights that CamTrap DP was first developed in 2023, but since then it's developed momentum globally, with many agencies adopting to share it. Both ALA and GBIF have dedicated ingestion infrastructure to bring in and standardize CamTrap DP data. Now, from a different perspective, we have Matt Hollanders, who is a analytics postdoc at the University of Newcastle, who says that in a world of big and ever-increasing data, standardizing and cataloging our camera trapping data is vital for realizing their potential. CamTrap DP, therefore, enables us to disseminate our work and permit us to synthesize datasets across the globe. Finally, to give an example beyond Australia, Francesca is a collaborator of mine from Italy. She's brought together multiple different data sets and struggled without CamTrap DP. But when it's been available, it's been a game changer for these sorts of studies because it enables data to be used beyond their initial research scope that can make a massive contribution to biodiversity observations across the globe. It's also important to recognize that if we're sharing data, we need to be able to receive and give credit. And we achieve this by minting research activity identifiers, or RAIDs, for each dataset. This is a persistent, citable, and traceable identifier. It's similar to a DOI, digital object identifier, but is a little bit more broad for the entire research activity. This process starts when a camera trapper decides to share data. We mint this RAID, and that RAID also includes any other sort of related identifiers. So your ORCIDs for individual researchers, your RORs for institutions, and any DOIs or URLs, or essentially links to papers, datasets, applications. When the data is discoverable, it can be cited in a research report or a manuscript, so then that usage is tracked and returned right back to the camera trapper. Therefore, this process ensures that when you share data and when it's used, you're able to receive proper credit for it. We know RAIDs are a new tool, so we're also developing an attribution guide to make sure everybody knows how to use this resource appropriately. So now, how do we actually get data into the database? We have two methods, and I want to highlight that neither of these are preferred. Both of them are perfect. There's no wrong way to provide data. The first is what I mentioned earlier, the new data pathway. Say you're just setting cameras, you have images, and you want to process them using our image platform. The other option is for our legacy data pathway. This is for old camera trapping data, or say you're using a different image platform like Wildlife Insights or Timelapse. We have an online submission tool where you can upload that data. Ultimately, both of these feed into the database. So I'll dig into both of these, starting with the new data platform. I spoke a bit in more detail about the image platform in our first webinar. So if you're keen to learn more about that platform, I'd recommend watching the first video. But for a brief overview, the image platform gives you access and ability to manage multiple different camera trapping projects. This is the overview page for one project. We've also incorporated bulk media and deployment uploads, which means we save massive amounts of time just getting data onto the platform. And then we also have the ability to select from multiple different computer vision models. This can be applied at the overall project, but you can also test out different computer vision models per image or sequence to see if one's performing better or worse than the other. And the platform also incorporates explicit human-in-the-loop review of images in a very intuitive format. Finally, you're able to export your data as spreadsheets, and it arrives formatted in CamTrap-DP. And we are working to develop an API connection from the image platform to our database so it's a seamless workflow. However, when you use the image platform, it doesn't automatically mean you share your data with the WildObs database. Instead, you have the choice to opt in when you're ready to share your data. For example, this could be you have identified and confirmed all the classifications of your species of interest. You're not going to do any other edits. You might as well share the data and get some rewards out of it. We can connect that through our API, but when you share data with the database, we'll solicit a bit more information, such as how you would like that data shared, which I'll talk about near the end of this talk. Now, for our legacy data, we have a data submission tool. And that data submission tool works through 4 different steps that I'll discuss briefly here. There's a bit of preparation that just informs what this survey is about to do, and then we collect our project level metadata. Now, I know these screenshots are really small, don't worry about the text on them, but it's just an example of the sort of question we'll be asking on this survey. And in each little question, we have a show guidance box that expands to provide a lot more information with hyperlinks and details. So ideally, every question is well informed without being overbearing to the reader. Next, we have a data standardization exercise, which is essentially a guided process to translate your data in your bespoke standard to CamTrap-DP. As an example, I've highlighted that there's observation columns, and one of these questions essentially is asking, what column did you use to describe scientific name, with the definition and full specification links as well. Finally, at the end of the data submission tool journey, you have the ability to upload your spreadsheets along with your responses, and that arrives right in our WildObs inbox. But the basic idea with this tool is that it starts where your data does. And as I mentioned earlier, this is perfect for camera trap data processed on other platforms. So if you select in the metadata section, you use wildlife insights or time lapse, we're working to make sure that all those values are actually pre-populated in the data standardization section as well. Regardless of which pathway you use, every mobilized data gets a quality control report. We inspect the metadata and 3 tables. And as an example, this is our table of contents, which is really quite extensive. Each section has multiple subsections within them. But the basic idea behind this is that it's an opportunity for us and data providers to make visible corrections to the data. As an example, oftentimes scientific names need to be corrected, particularly if they use terms like undescribed, small, medium mammal, this sort of stuff. And ultimately, before a data set can be saved and enter our curation pipeline, we require 5 manual approval gates to ensure that the data has actually been reviewed by a professional on our team that has a good understanding of what to look for here. This is also an opportunity to ensure data providers remain explicitly in the loop. This report ensures that there's no surprises. Data providers will understand how and why data has been transformed. This report also includes a number of visualizations, like an interactive map to see where your cameras are, filterable and downloadable taxonomy tables, and histograms denoting sampling duration and sampling effort. I'm happy to announce that we've actually just put our legacy data submission tool online today. So all data is worth publishing. If you think you have some data that you'd be happy to share, please scan the QR code. It'll take you right to the website. And personally, I'm super interested in trying to mobilize some non-standard camera deployments like arboreal or vertically oriented cameras. If you're identifying individuals, putting them in nest boxes, anything, we'd love to help you out there. So now, what happens inside the database? I'm hopeful it's not going to be as scary as this nighttime cassowary. A key incentive for sharing with the database is that you receive more than you give. We already get a useful data export out of our image platform. It's in CamTrap-DP, but we apply a curation pipeline to enhance the data by contextualizing existing information and adding more information. Essentially, we expand this standard in ecologically meaningful ways. To achieve this, I've developed a multi-step data curation pipeline that operates at scale. It's rigorous and scalable because it runs on the University of Queensland supercomputers, And rather than lay out a complex flowchart of how this pipeline actually works, I thought I'd just break it down into a few categories. A key one is that data is checked. Every data package receives over 40 different quality checks that run automatically, and all data packages are inspected together to ensure database alignment. The data is enriched in many different ways. For example, observations are classified into independent detection events that you can then later control the temporal independence window. We define spatial and temporal surveys for every data set, and we also calculate an additional resource of over 20 different spatial and temporal covariates for every camera deployment. Finally, we make sure that that data is findable. We mint that RAID for each data set, we upload it to our database, which then means it's accessible through our R package or external partners. In one way or another, as Matthew mentioned, I've been working on this pipeline since 2022. So I hope with my experience and longevity on this project, you can believe me when I say it's only been getting better. So the final product that arrives out of the database is a data package that's been spatially defined. It has flexible survey windows. Any relevant media that has been openly shared with us will be sent to our tagged image repository to enhance computer vision training. And the data is ready to use and analyze immediately with our R package. And any additional identifiers, so papers, grants, applications, contributors, all these things are accessible with that data. Now we use a MongoDB database to store all this information, and every resource is schema validated. So you can be confident that when you have access to your data, you also have access to many different data packages formatted in exactly the same way. So now that we've highlighted what you can get out of it, how do you get data out of the database? We have 5 different pathways, and I'll dive into each of these in just a moment. The first and most readily available is our R package that we've mentioned a few times today. So if you work in R, you could be running your first WildObs analysis before I'm even done speaking. This R package is interoperable with Tidyverse, CamTrap R, Unmarked, and many more. And we have a query and download function that enables discovery and access of our database. You can scan the QR code here. It'll take you to our GitHub page with instructions on how to query the database. We're always keen to expand functionality based on user feedback. So if you would like a certain function or you see a problem with the data, add an issue. We'd love to help out there. But if you don't want to do any R coding, we totally understand. We're working on developing a web application so you can explore your data in the browser. You can query the database using several filters that will ultimately be the same as our R package. You can discover and request data from specific projects. And when you click into a specific project, you can get relevant information about its metadata, detections, and deployments. And you can also see we attach all relevant reports to that data package. So for example, the quality control report would be accessible to data providers and if openly shared, accessible to other folks as well. Now, this web application will be available in late 2026, so it's still very much under development. We've also partnered with external hosting solutions to ensure that our data is not siloed in a new platform, but rather integrated into existing biodiversity data infrastructure. We work with the Atlas of Living, Living Australia to share our presence-only occurrence records, but they also host our tagged image repository, meaning that each occurrence has at least one validated image, which is then used for computer vision training. If you'd like to access our data on the ALA, we have this QR code here that you can scan. Now, we also have partnered with TERN, the Terrestrial Ecosystem Research Network, where we are able to provide structured surveys where we can generate some of this presence absence data, which is useful for correcting for imperfect detection. The platform we will host it on is EcoPlots, which is specifically designed for the systematic survey data. And we're almost finalizing our first publication there, so keep an eye out on that space. But if you would like to learn more about TERN's EcoPlots platform, please scan the QR code there. We also offer options for standardized reporting because we use this consistent data standard. It really easily enables reproducible reporting. Let's imagine we didn't use the standard. If we have multiple groups collecting raw data in inconsistent formats, it takes a lot of effort to manually wrangle that data into one spreadsheet. And then because it's an inconsistent spreadsheet, the report is reproduced slowly, inconsistently, and it's hard to compare through years. Instead, when we use a consistent data standard, this data is shared once, it's been standardized, and it's citable. We develop a pipeline for exactly what that report needs to say, and then we rerun multiple years of data through that same pipeline, and we get the same standardized report ready to go. This sort of thing is particularly relevant for NRM groups, permitting requirement, funding agencies, potentially even coursework for academics. Do you have a specific reporting format you're interested in for your camera trapping data? If so, please reach out. We'd love to hear from you. I also want to take a moment to highlight that WildObs data is already accelerating cutting-edge research. We've partnered with EcoCommons, who have developed tutorials on how to run occupancy models, both conceptually and practically. In the practical example, we use WildObs R to query the database and run single season, single species occupancy models in unmarked. If you'd like to learn more, you can scan the QR code here. And essentially, this runs us through hypothesis testing, comparing models, visualizing results, and doing a bit of data sanitation as well. I also want to highlight a new R package developed by our colleague Matt Hollanders, who I mentioned earlier, which is a bit more complex Bayesian multi-species occupancy modeling. This is specifically designed for camera trapping data, and because we've been using WildObs R to parameterize the models, it automatically accepts CamTrap DP. And this sort of analysis is perfect for providing fine-grained inferences from camera trapping data by carefully quantifying detection rates. So if you'd like to learn more about the ARU, Automated Recording Units homepage, you can scan this QR code here. Finally, I'd like to end on our data sharing and sensitive data options. If you'd like to learn more about our data sharing options, we have support articles. You can read all the full details at that QR code, but we offer three levels. The preferred and best option is our open data sharing. This means everyone has access to the metadata, images, detections. The data will be downloadable through our platform and our partner platforms, and you get this publicly assigned RAID so we can cite and find your data in other platforms. Across all of these data sharing agreements, you always have unlimited access to your own data, but here you decide how you want attribution for your specific data sets. This open data has no embargo, and it's shared openly with ALA and Turn. For our partial data sharing, we understand that open doesn't work for everybody, so we have created this as an sort of a middle ground. In this case, we're only sharing the metadata, contact information, related identifiers, and the spatial temporal survey extent. None of the individual detections or images are publicly accessible, but interested parties can contact you for more information. We allow a 24-month embargo period, and ideally, we'd work to transition this towards an open data sharing agreement eventually, but this is intended for data provenance and sovereignty needs. Finally, we do have a closed data sharing agreement, and in this scenario, the public sees nothing. Nothing is shared with our external partners. And ideally, we would work to develop a memorandum of understanding that could ideally transition this closed data to an open or partial data set later. Currently, this requires agreement with the WildObs team and might be available in exchange for project co-investment. But if this sounds like something you're interested in, please reach out to us. I also want to highlight how we handle sensitive species information. Again, we've just published a support article providing all the details about how this is actually done, but the basic idea here is we're continually aligning our practices with the Atlas of Living Australia. We can imagine a non-sensitive species detection where we have an observation record from a specific media file that relates from a detection to a camera. When we have a sensitive species detected, we actually break the links between the detection and the camera. So while our deployments file may actually tell us where all the cameras are, our observations file with that endangered species will remove where that camera was from. We currently use the EPBC Act to determine which species are threatened, but we're planning to transition to the restricted access species data framework by the middle of the year. Finally, just want to highlight that users can request access to unobscured data. Oops. Finally, just to get us ready for the Q&A session, I've set up a little Mentimeter poll here. So if you'd like to log on to menti.com, you can use our code. You can scan the QR code here. I'll leave this up for just a few minutes to see if anybody's interested in thinking about how they would consider sharing camera trapping data. Does anybody have new images and videos, legacy data, not ready to share, or unsure?
Can only sign up, you can only choose one of the options. And I think some people would like to choose multiple, but we'll still get an idea of what's happening.
Yeah. See, I might need to refresh the page for this. Nope. Let's see here. Okay, that's great. Very glad to see that there are both, yeah, new projects and legacy data that would be great to share. And hopefully for those that are not ready to share or unsure, that's exactly what our Q&A session can be about next. So, just to wrap up, a bit of a conclusion. I hope I've helped make it clear that WildObs is trying to create an images to inferences ecosystem. We're all setting cameras in the field. We can decide if we want to use the image platform or work with our existing workflows. Regardless of the path we take, this data can all be curated and fed into our database. And once it's in our database, it can be easily disseminated and accessed through our R package, web application, or national infrastructure partners. Therefore, WildObs is this large database or ecosystem of products, tools, and services that cover the full lifecycle of camera trapping data. And just to bring it back to the story I shared earlier, the story doesn't end with three people in one lab. Ideally, this ends with every camera trapper in Australia as a co-author on the same ongoing project. In this scenario, we can imagine one lab for all of Australia that's now able to answer questions at speeds and scales previously out of reach and that no single team could tackle alone. Finally, I'd like to end with a bit of a timeline highlighting some of our next upcoming events. Our data submission tool is just launched today. We've got our next webinar coming up on May 7th, where Renuka will be discussing our computer vision models, and our image platform goes public in June. We have a couple of workshops planned, including at ResBuzz and potentially ESA, and a couple other things to keep an eye out for. But throughout this entire process, we're always updating training materials and onboarding support, and of course, updating the database as people submit data. I want to thank our partners and collaborators. This is, as Matt mentioned, a huge group with lots of different organizations involved, and it's great to see lots of different organizations coming together for this one. Finally, I'm happy to open it up for our Q&A session. I'll leave our slides up. I can move around to a few different ones. And if you have questions, you can go to our website. If you have legacy data you'd like to submit, you can scan the middle QR code, or if you're interested in our R package, you can scan the last QR code. With that, I'll say thank you. We can get on with the Q&A.
Thanks so much, Zach. It was really nice. I'll start with Q&A. The first question we have is from Brad. We undertake government surveys on private land and have data agreements with landholders that we won't share the data, but we do use it for analysis. Can this data be stored and processed on WildObs that is never shared?
So that scenario sounds like a closed data sharing agreement. So if it's never shared, if it's never made visible beyond the original team, that would be an opportunity to begin exploring co-investment or working towards a specific MOU that would eventually expose that data to make it public. A key goal of WildObs, and hopefully I tried to make this clear with the fair data, is that when data is accessible, findable, and useful for others, we can do so much more with it than the original team. And I think also our embargo periods are useful for that as well, where we can hide data for a few years and then expose it later.
Mhm.
Great, Zach. I'll just add on to that because the next question is similar, which is, do I need institutional approval to share data? For example, I'm a PhD student. How am I able to share data? So many people don't realize this, but if you work at a university, your data is owned by the university. Similar things happen when you're working for government agencies or NGOs, where the person setting the cameras feels like they own the data, and they really control how they share the data, but they don't control their ownership of the data. So the way it works in practice for universities is if you're working there, you can share your data as long as it's contributing to research and not being sold. And nothing in a WildObs is being sold. So we fall into an easy data sharing agreement from all universities for that purpose. Um, for for organizations like the government, that usually qualifies us as being fine to share. And what a lot of people also don't realize is many state governments and federal governments have policies to essentially are supposed to mandate data sharing. For example, New South Wales has a mandate to make their biodiversity data public. The same goes for the national DQ. Now, WildObs is not going to enforce any of that. If you're working for one of these organizations and want to keep your data as partial, that's fine. We might encourage you to make it public and to transition to comply, but we are not an enforcer and won't be doing anything like that. You can use the portal, keep your data as partial, and not have to worry. Now, if you wanted to have closed data sharing agreements and you work for the government, it's likely that we're already in talks with your agency about having agreements for co-investment. And a lot of time, the co-investment is not necessarily cash, it's just an agreement to work together. So in these cases, you should first send us an email, and we likely will have a solution ready to go.
Great. I'll move on to the next question from Seb. He says, great presentation. For the closed data sharing agreements, is the co-investment option dependent on the data size and longevity of the agreement, or is it standardized? Where could we find more information about this?
I take this one again just because it's quite similar, which is if it's a closed data sharing agreement, you should send us an email. But no, we're not going to ignore small players. So everyone will have a chance to discuss how they want their information shared. Um, and yeah, it's a case by case basis. And it so send us an email. I'm very confident we can find solutions for almost all of our users.
Mhm.
Okay. Next question from Emily is, can you change the embargo period or swap to open access before the selected embargo period has ended?
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's very, very doable and quite an easy one to fix as well. So, as an example, in the quality control report, we've got the embargo date at which it should be released. And in reviewing that script or that document, you can always say, hey, like it doesn't need to be that long. I can change it, and we can very easily correct that information. That's no dramas.
And we'll
Oh,
also allow the user to send us an email if they want to extend their embargo.
Correct.
But the reason for this 2-year embargo is number one, it's consistent with other platforms like Wildlife Insights. And number two, there's a lot of situations when people are collecting data and then they move on. So if you don't set these timelines and someone who's collecting data, let's say in a research lab, and then they graduate and they move on, or they work at a government agency and then they finish and move on, that data can transition to open and not be lost forever.
Yeah.
mhm. Perfect. Next question from Alicia. What is the pricing structure of WildObs?
I think I'll let Matt handle that one. I don't think we have anything specifically written down yet.
Yeah, there is no cost for our users for now, and there likely will never be a cost for academics. Most NGOs can work with us as a in-kind investment where we just work together. So, for example, we already do this with Bush Heritage, and they work with us to develop these products, and then they use them. The same goes for government agencies. So we have investment from multiple government agencies. It's not usually cash. It's usually just personnel to work with us to build these things. As you saw maybe on the list of different sponsors, WildObs is a distributed network of people coming together to build these tools, all organized under the ARDC funding arrangement with key partners like Turn, and then housed at QSIF. So we really are, multi-stakeholder, and likely your organization will be able to work with us, use the products for free forever, and hopefully engage, and that will be sufficient.
Thanks.
Thank you. The next question from Monica, it says, what kind of turnaround time can we expect from the AI tool in identifying animals? Current AI tools can take quite a long time and compute power to analyze large sets of images.
Yeah, for an example, Uh, Renuka is our computer vision specialist, and we just uploaded 1 million images from a recent survey. And they took a few days to process all of them. And we were running on one GPU, and we're moving that to 7 GPUs. So I could imagine we could easily do 1 million images in under a day by the next few weeks, and likely 1 million images within a few hours um, in the next year.
And I would like to add here that you won't be relying on your local workstation on this computation power. It will be running on our servers, so you do not need to have the compute power on your end. You will just submit your data, the camera trap images through the user interface, and the computation will happen on our end, and you will be able to export the analyses after it has completed. And don't have any further questions.
I had a question for Zach.
Yes.
Let's say I have legacy data in spreadsheet format, but I don't know where all the images are. And even if I did, they don't have file paths like these media paths. Can I still use Cantrap DP?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. We can still create the Camtrap DP data package, but of course, that media table that we have is going to be a lot less useful than it would be if we did have file paths. This has been a really common phenomenon for a lot of data sets we've received, unsurprisingly. And we've developed a couple workarounds to make sure we can still create this media file, even if it's not terribly useful, just to ensure it adheres to the standard and is still regularly deliverable. And so we can still gain our ecological inferences from that data. But unfortunately, you can't use that for computer vision training.
There's a
We have a question from Shaina. Can you move a closed project to an open project without an MOU?
I
Yeah,
would imagine, yeah.
we don't have MOUs. We have data sharing licenses that you choose, and there's a set number of them. So WildObs has already many dozens of partners, and we'll have many hundreds of partners. It's not feasible to have MOUs with everybody. So we adopt the exact same policy that Turn and ALA do, where you select your data license that you're going to use, and then we move forward with that. So there's a question, can you change your data license? And yeah, you would talk to whoever's a part of your team that responsible for that data and decide how you want to change it from, let's say, partial to open.
Yeah.
And if you want to do that anytime, you just send us an email.
Yeah, and we have our support at wildobs.org.au that goes to a number of folks here. So we'd all be happy to help with that sort of thing. But yeah, very, very doable. And the good part about our data curation pipeline is that it's all, we can very easily get into it, edit things as needed, and we have easily implemented corrections.
Great. Next question from Paul. Will you have API documentation to datasets?
Yeah, so we actually already have an API connection to our MongoDB through our data download function in the WildObs R package. We don't have any specific like API connector documentation yet, so you could connect independently to the MongoDB database. If that's something that you are interested in, you would have to reach out to us specifically, and we could try to work together to develop something that'd be useful for you there.
Great.
There's a question for you, Renuka. Can we use the platform to build custom models?
Yeah, that's interesting. So right now, we have the code base that we are using to train our models. It's already publicly, I'm going to make sure that it's publicly released in the next few weeks. So you can use that to fine tune your own version of SpeciesNet. Um, but the platform in itself, it actually uses the trained models in the background. So it is not designed to build your own models, but we will release our code base and you will be able to train your own models with the data set that you have. Uh, but the platform is designed just to use the trained models for analyses of your camera trap images.
And just to follow up on that, we have a tagged image repository that is already live, and we're trying to build it right now. So what this is a set of thousands and thousands of images with the species tagged in the right format, so that you can run your own models in your own architecture that you want. So that's available. We host that on ALA, and there's already been a link put in the chat for that by Claire. Thank you, Claire. This is really helpful to have all these links in the chat. And to move forward, we really do want people to contribute tagged images so that we can fill out the tagged repository for other states. And so if that's something that you have, we would be super excited to work together to add that to the public repository, and then we can use it to train local models for your region.
We have two more questions, one from Seb. Are there any requirements that we need to be aware of using WildObs CamTrap DP datasets? Example, acknowledge the partners or that the derivative work needs to be published under the same license.
Yeah, that's a good question. And that's actually why we're creating an attribution guide that will provide additional guidance, not only around how to cite that research activity identifier, but what other associated identifiers like DOIs, ORCIDs, RORs, how they can be used to ensure we're attributing proper credit. At the moment, our R package, the only openly available data sets for download are those that we've published with the Atlas of Living Australia. So at the moment, until we finalize our RAID minting process, which we're very close, we just use the DOIs assigned by the Atlas of Living Australia. But that will be updating very soon, and with that, the attribution guide will provide guidance.
Amazing. Last question from Steph. If we also need to enter the data into our own state database using different data standards, then CamTrap TP, can we create other templates in WildObs?
Yeah, well, not in the image platform. If you're using the image platform and exporting it, it would be exported to CamTrap DP, but we could always do a crosswalk into whatever other data standard you have. But I will just highlight that if it is for a state or federal level biodiversity data repository, we're probably already working with those teams to ensure that our data flows seamlessly between these systems. So a big push we have, hopefully for this year, is integrating cleanly with the federal biodiversity data repository as well. So a lot of state level aggregators ultimately end up there. So we might bypass state level and ensure it ends up in the federal level. But we're still exploring that space. And yeah, the beautiful part of a well-documented data standard is that we can translate across different data standards. So it shouldn't be a problem.
And
Amazing.
just to follow up on a really key objective of ours and something that we're going to do for sure is if you're using the WildObs ecosystem, so you're putting your images on the platform, it's going into our CamDB, our camera database, we will then have the option for you to comply with your reporting. So we will produce and share the data with the people that you need it shared with. So the reason for that is because we also plan for a lot of this to be used by the government agencies themselves, right? So we need to be able to feed right back into those agencies that are the ones curating that data, like the biodiversity aggregators, maybe in, yeah. So we plan to have this all integrated so that you don't have to do a separate thing like download the data, convert it, and send it off to your reporting requirements. We're trying to set up API connections where we can move data to the people who want it and need it to comply with your reporting automatically.
Perfect.
It's great. I think that's all the time we have, but we have another question we can respond to Jess via email.
Short answer is yes, we can export, we can take a lot of different varieties of tagged image repositories and data sets at WildObs and just send us an email with a quick description of what you have and we can work from there.
And this sort of scenario of tagged images in Camelot is exactly what our legacy data submission tool is designed for. So absolutely, we'd love to help out there.
Great. Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for joining.
Yeah, thanks for attending.